You ever stop and wonder why so many of our biggest ideas, things like democracy, science, logic, all seem to point back to one specific time and place? Well, today we're going to crack open that historical mystery. What was the secret ingredient in ancient Greece that made it the birthplace of Western philosophy? And I mean, their influence was huge. Just look at this timeline. It's practically an unbroken chain of thought stretching for almost 2,500 years, right from Plato to modern thinkers like John Dewey. The kinds of questions the Greeks were the first to ask, they're the same fundamental questions we're still wrestling with today. So this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It's the start of a conversation that we're all still a part of. Which, of course, brings us right to the core puzzle of this whole thing. Why there? What on earth was so special about ancient Greece? Now, you might be thinking of the obvious stuff. Were they the oldest civilization around? Nope, not even close. Egypt and Mesopotamia were way, way older. Okay, so were they the first to invent writing? That's not it either. The real answer is a bit more complicated. It wasn't about what they had. It was about their unique intellectual environment. To figure this out, we've got to look at two big clues. Think of it like a detective story. And our first clue has to do with religion, or more specifically, the very unusual way the Greeks thought about their gods. See, unlike a lot of other ancient religions, Greek mythology didn't hand you a complete rulebook for how to live. And the gods themselves, they were a mess. They were jealous, they made huge mistakes, they certainly weren't all-knowing or all-powerful. And this is the absolutely crucial part. Because the gods weren't perfect, questioning them wasn't some terrible crime. It left a space open, a gap for human reason to step in and start asking its own questions. And the relationship the Greeks had with their gods was so personal. The thinking was, the gods weren't these distant, abstract forces. They were literally your ancestors. That creates this direct family link, right? It makes them approachable, understandable, and most importantly, it makes them fallible. They weren't these absolute authorities who had everything figured out. So we've got our first clue, a religion that basically left the door open for questions. Now let's move on to our second clue, and this is where it all starts to click together. Let's talk about the politics of the Greek city-states. Remember, ancient Greece wasn't some huge empire run by a single all-powerful ruler. It was a collection of independent city-states called polis. And in places like Athens, life revolved around public debate in the marketplace, the agora. The ability to persuade people, to argue your point, to discuss ideas, that wasn't just a nice skill to have, it was essential. The whole system was built on it. It was truly a culture of conversation. Okay, so let's put the pieces together. We have our two big clues, a religion that invited questions and a political system that demanded debate. So what happens when you combine those two things? Well, let's flip it around for a second. Think about where philosophy couldn't grow. It's just not going to flourish in a society where religion already claims to have every single answer, right? And it definitely can't survive in a place where powerful leaders demand total obedience and not debate. You need an intellectual vacuum. You need freedom. And there it is. That's the secret. Ancient Greece had this perfect storm, this incredibly rare combination, a religion that left room for doubt, and a political culture that celebrated asking questions out loud. Together, they created this unique space for intellectual freedom, the fertile ground where a whole new way of thinking could finally take root and grow. So what did these first philosophers do with this amazing new freedom? They immediately started asking some of the biggest, most mind-bending questions about reality itself. And these are dilemmas that, honestly, we're still wrestling with today. Take this famous question from a philosopher named Heraclitus. He asks, can you step in the same river twice? He would say, no. Why? Because the water is always flowing, it's always changing. But then the question gets deeper. If the river is constantly changing, aren't you? Are you the exact same person who stepped into it just a moment ago? It's a brilliant puzzle about identity and change. Or what about one of Zeno's famous paradoxes? To walk across a room, you first have to go halfway. Makes sense. But then you have to cover half of the remaining distance, and then half of that, and so on forever. So logically, it seems like you can never actually arrive. This is the kind of abstract thinking that just completely challenges our basic ideas about motion, space, and even infinity. This is what happens when the mind is set free.
And that really gets to the heart of the whole Greek philosophical spirit. It's this deep-seated instinct to not just accept things because that's the way they've always been. It's about questioning the ready-made answers that we get from tradition, from authority, from anyone. And that leaves us with a final thought, a question they've kind of passed down to us. As we look at our own world, with all of its certainties and assumptions, what are the ready-made answers that we should be questioning today?